I did not raise my voice. I did not slam the door. I simply set down my suitcase and listened to my own son tell a room full of strangers that I was dying. My name is Walter Meacham. I am 63 years old, and for 38 years I built a chain of hardware and lumber supply stores out of a single rented storefront in Dayton, Ohio. 2 weeks ago, my daughter-in-law sent me a message that read, "Come stay with us for Christmas, Dad. The kids miss their grandfather." I booked a flight the next morning. I packed a leather tool belt for my grandson Caleb, the same one my own father gave me when I turned 16, oiled and restitched by my own hands. But when the cab dropped me at the curb of my son's house in Charlotte, and I walked around back to surprise them through the kitchen window, I saw my daughter-in-law wearing my late wife's sapphire ring, laughing with a circle of women I did not recognize, while my son stood in the living room, shaking hands with men in expensive suits, telling them their father-in-law was fading fast in a nursing facility outside Dayton and wouldn't trouble them much longer. I did not knock on that door in anger. I turned around, walked back to the curb, and started making calls. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever had to remind your own family who built the house they're standing in, hit that like button now. The wind coming off the Charlotte hills was sharp for December, the kind of cold that gets into an old man's knees before it ever touches his face. I stood at the edge of my son's driveway with my suitcase handle biting into my palm, staring at a house that I still, technically, owned half of. Not the mortgage, the actual bones of it. 5 years back, I had co-signed the loan and covered the down payment when Roger, my son, told me his construction firm was between contracts and Ashley, his wife, was pregnant with their second. I never asked for a dime of it back. I told him that's what family does. The flight from Dayton had been smooth, 3 hours of quiet anticipation. I'd spent the whole ride imagining my grandson Caleb's face when he saw the tool belt, imagining Ashley's youngest, little Nora, climbing into my lap the way she used to before she got too big and too shy. I had been lonely since my wife Doris passed 18 months ago. The house in Dayton had gotten too quiet, full of her coffee mugs still hanging on their hooks, her reading glasses still folded on the nightstand where she'd left them the last night. When Ashley's text came through, "The kids miss their grandfather," I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in over a year. I had called Roger twice from the airport, straight to voicemail both times. I called Ashley once more from the cab. It rang out. I told myself it was the holidays, that they were probably elbow deep in mashed potatoes and screaming children, that phones get left in coat pockets during family chaos. I am a practical man. I do not leap to the worst conclusion. I paid the driver, thanked him, and decided I'd surprise them instead of standing on the porch waiting to be let in like some kind of stranger. I circled around back because I remembered from my last visit that the kitchen door was usually unlocked, that Ashley liked to keep it cracked even in the cold so the dog could wander the yard. I meant to walk straight in and call out anybody home for an old man, the way I always did. Instead, I stopped at the window. The house was full of people, not family. Strangers in blazers and cocktail dresses, standing in clusters with wine glasses, the kind of crowd you'd see at a fundraiser, not a family Christmas. There was a banner strung over the fireplace that read, "Meacham Construction, a New Era." My chest went tight and cold before my mind had even caught up to what I was looking at. And there was Ashley, in the center of a knot of laughing women, her hand raised to gesture at something, sunlight from the chandelier catching a ring on her finger. My breath caught. That was Doris's ring, the sapphire her own mother had given her. The one Doris made me promise, made me swear on her hospital bed would go to our granddaughter Nora someday, when she was old enough to understand what it meant. I had handed that ring to Roger myself the week after the funeral and told him to lock it in the safe deposit box until Nora turned 18. It was on Ashley's hand, sparkling under party lights while she laughed with people I'd never met. Then I found Roger. He was near the fireplace, dressed sharper than I'd ever seen him, shaking the hand of a heavy-set man who I recognized with a jolt from a regional business journal Doris used to leave on the kitchen table. A commercial real estate investor. Roger was smiling that same easy, charming smile he'd had since he was 6 years old, talking his way out of trouble, and I watched his mouth form words I couldn't hear through the glass, but I could read his face well enough. He was performing, he was selling something. I stood in the cold and pressed my hand flat against the freezing window glass. And slowly, the pieces clicked together with a violence that took my legs out from under me for a moment. Roger and Ashley hadn't been avoiding my calls because they were busy. They didn't know I was here, because they never expected me to come. The invitation hadn't come from either of them at all. It had come from Caleb's phone, my 16-year-old grandson, who I would later learn had typed it out himself from his mother's messaging account because something about the way his parents had been talking about me for months had not sat right with him. I did not storm the door. I did not bang on the glass and demand an explanation. I have run a business through 2 recessions and a fire that took out my flagship store in 2009. I know that a man who reacts before he understands has already lost. I stepped back from the window, walked to the front porch, and rang the bell like a guest. The door opened, and Roger's easy smile evaporated the instant his eyes landed on me. He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost climb his front steps. He didn't say, "Dad." He didn't pull me into the house. He grabbed my forearm hard, harder than my own son had ever gripped me in his life, and hauled me sideways off the porch, around the side of the house, into the dark, cold garage, and slammed the door shut behind us before I could say a single word. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice shaking with something closer to panic than anger. "I got a message," I said, keeping my voice level. "Ashley said you wanted me here for Christmas. I never sent that." He was pacing now, running both hands through his hair. "You're not supposed to be here, Dad. You're supposed to be—" He stopped himself. "Supposed to be where, Roger?" He looked at me then, and something in his face went cold and strange, like a stranger had stepped behind his eyes. "The Ridgeview Care Center. In Dayton. That's what I told everyone. That's what I told the investors in there. That you're—" His jaw worked. "That your health has been declining. That you're not well." The garage went silent except for the hum of the freezer against the far wall. "I passed a full physical 6 weeks ago, Roger. My doctor said I have the heart of a man 20 years younger." "It doesn't matter what's true," he said, and his voice cracked with a kind of desperation I had never heard from him, not once in 34 years. "I needed a story, Dad. The firm is short on capital. I told the investors in there, I've been distracted because my father is dying, that I need this deal to close fast because I want to make sure you're taken care of before you're gone. If they see you standing here, healthy, in a suit, asking questions, the whole thing falls apart tonight." Something inside my chest didn't break. It went quiet and hard, like water turning to ice all at once. My son had erased me. He had turned me into a dying man to close a business deal, and he hadn't even had the decency to ask my permission to bury me. Roger reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, and pressed 2 folded $100 bills into my coat pocket like he was tipping a valet. "There's a Marriott off I-77, about 15 minutes from here. I'll call you a car. Stay there tonight. Don't call anyone. Don't talk to anyone. I will handle this and explain everything tomorrow." He didn't wait for me to answer. He opened the side door, walked me to the curb himself, and flagged down a rideshare car that must have already been circling the block. He put my suitcase in the trunk, shut the door, and turned back toward his own house. Back toward the party, back toward my dead wife's ring glittering on another woman's hand, without a single glance over his shoulder. I sat in the back of that car in silence, watching the warm windows of my son's house shrink in the rearview mirror. I did not cry. I have buried a father, a mother, and a wife, and I know exactly what grief feels like moving through a man's chest. This was not grief. This was something colder and far more useful. I unfolded the $200 bills on my knee and looked at them for a long time. 38 years, and this was what I was worth to my own son. $200 in a motel, 15 minutes away from the family that didn't want me to exist. Roger had no idea what he had just woken up. The Marriott room smelled like carpet cleaner and stale heating vents. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the traffic hum on the interstate outside. And for the first time since the cab dropped me at Roger's curb, I let myself think clearly. Not as a father, as a businessman. My name is Walter Meacham, and I did not build Meacham Building Supply out of self-pity. I built it out of a single rented lot on the outskirts of Dayton in 1988, with a used forklift and a loan co-signed by a man who thought I was a fool for leaving a stable job at a regional distributor. I worked 16-hour days for a decade before the second location opened. I learned every part of that business from the ground floor up: inventory, freight contracts, payroll, insurance liability, all of it because I never trusted anyone else to know it better than I did. By the time Doris and I sent Roger off to college, Meacham Building Supply had 11 locations across 3 states and a construction subcontracting arm that Roger himself had begged to run after graduation. I gave him that. I stepped back from daily operations after Doris passed, handed him the president's title, let him make the calls, sign the contracts, shake the hands, but I never once signed away my controlling ownership stake. The holding company, the actual legal entity that owned every warehouse, every fleet vehicle, every account that was still mine. Roger ran the ship. I owned the harbor. I walked to the small motel desk, pulled my laptop from my bag, and logged into the company's financial portal using the same master credentials I'd used for 15 years. Credentials Roger had never thought to change because he assumed his aging father had neither the interest nor the technical ability to look. What I found in the next hour turned the cold, quiet thing in my chest into something sharper. The maintenance and equipment leasing line had nearly tripled over 8 months. I dug into the vendor payments and found the money routing through a consulting entity registered to a PO. Box in Delaware, a shell. Plain as day. The kind any first-year accountant would flag in 30 seconds. Payroll records showed 3 new strategic advisors on 6-figure monthly retainers, none of them with a single credential in construction or supply logistics. When I searched their names, I found 2 of them connected to Ashley's sister's event planning firm, which had opened its second location in Charlotte's most expensive shopping district 8 months earlier. Then I found the loan documents. Meacham Building Supply had been debt-free for 11 years. I had made certain of that personally. It was the one promise I made myself after watching 2 competitors go under in 2009, buried under leveraged debt. But sitting on the screen in front of me was a $3.2 million commercial credit line opened 4 months ago, collateralized against our 2 largest distribution warehouses. Warehouses I had paid off in cash, brick by brick, over 2 decades. I sat back in the cheap motel chair and stared at the number until it blurred. Roger hadn't just lied about my health to close an investment deal. He had already taken the money. And a man doesn't fabricate his father's terminal decline to secure a $3.2 million loan unless he desperately needs people to stop asking questions about where his father's signature came from. I picked up the motel phone and dialed a number I had memorized for 30 years. "George, it's late," said the voice on the other end, thick with sleep, then sharpening instantly. Except his name wasn't George. It was Frank Delgado, my attorney and closest friend since the week I filed the paperwork to open my very first store. "Walter? What's wrong?" "I'm in Charlotte," I said, staring at the glowing screen. "And Roger has been stealing from the company. He's telling people I'm dying to cover it up." There was a long silence, then the sound of bed sheets moving. "Give me 10 minutes to get to my office computer," Frank said, his voice already shifting into the clipped, careful tone I'd heard him use in courtrooms. "Tell me everything." I told him everything. The Shell consulting firm, the Phantom advisors, the $3.2 million loan against warehouses that had never carried a mortgage in their lives. Frank listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Walter," he said finally, "I need you to open the legal compliance folder, right now. There's something in there you need to see with your own eyes." My hands were steady, but something cold coiled tight in my stomach as I navigated the file directory. I clicked open a document titled Durable Power of Attorney Executed. I read the first line. Then I read it again, because my mind refused to accept it the first time. It named me, Walter James Meacham, as suffering from early onset cognitive decline, no longer competent to manage my personal or business affairs. It named Roger as my sole legal representative, with full authority over the company and my personal estate. Attached to it was a medical evaluation on the letterhead of a private clinic in Charlotte. I had never once set foot inside, signed by a neurologist I had never met in my life, diagnosing me with a condition I did not have. My son had not just lied to strangers at a party. He had forged a legal document declaring me mentally incompetent, using a fabricated diagnosis from a doctor who had never examined me, and used it to secure millions of dollars against property I had spent my life paying for in full. "Frank," I said quietly, "how is a bank supposed to accept that without me physically present?" "They shouldn't have," Frank said, his voice tight with fury on my behalf. "Which means either the bank was sloppy, or someone at that bank was paid to be sloppy. Walter, this isn't just fraud against you. This is bank fraud, wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, and forgery of a legal medical instrument. This is federal." I sat in the dark motel room with the glow of the laptop washing over my face, and I felt something settle over me that was not sorrow anymore. The father who had taught Roger to ride a bike, who had sat up with him through fevers, who had co-signed his mortgage without a second thought. That man went quiet somewhere deep inside me. What remained was the man who had built an empire out of a rented lot with nothing but his own two hands, and had never once let anyone take what belonged to him. "Frank," I said, "I don't want this quiet. I don't want a settlement behind closed doors. I want him to fall exactly as far and as publicly as he tried to bury me." Frank was silent for a moment, and then I heard it, that same dry chuckle he used to give me before we walked into a courtroom we both knew we'd win. "Then let's build the case, old friend. Tell me everything you found, from the beginning." For the next 2 hours, I walked him through every ledger, every wire transfer, every falsified name on the payroll. By the time the sun came up gray and cold over the interstate, Frank had already flagged a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, a woman named Special Agent Renata Vance, who had handled elder fraud cases in 3 states. He told me she would want to see everything by end of day. I hadn't slept. I didn't feel tired. I felt the way I used to feel the night before a major contract negotiation, sharp, focused, entirely awake. At 6:15 that morning, there was a soft knock at my motel door. I froze. No one knew where I was. Roger had told the rideshare driver a hotel, not a room number, and I hadn't told a single soul my location, except Frank, 3 states away. I looked through the peephole, and my chest seized. It was a tall, gangly teenage boy in a soaked hoodie, shivering in the gray morning light. My grandson, Caleb. I opened the door and he practically collapsed into my arms, sobbing so hard he could barely breathe. I pulled him inside, locked the door, and sat him down on the edge of the bed, letting him cry into my shoulder the way he used to when he was small and scraped his knee on the driveway. When he finally caught his breath, he looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, searching my face like he was terrified of what he'd find. "You know who I am," he whispered. "Of course I know you, Caleb. I remember teaching you to swing a hammer in my garage. I remember you hate green beans, and you've wanted a truck since you were 9 years old." I held his face in both hands. "There is nothing wrong with my mind, son. There never was." He broke down completely then, and between sobs, he told me everything. His parents had sat him down 3 months ago and told him Grandpa's memory was failing fast, that he was in a care facility outside Dayton, that calling me would only upset and confuse me. He said something about it never sat right, the way I'd sounded so sharp on the phone just months before, helping him study for his history final. So when he overheard his father on a call last week talking about closing the deal before Christmas, he took a risk. He unlocked his mother's phone while she was in the shower and sent the invitation himself, just to see if I would come. Just to see if I was really as far gone as they claimed. When he saw me arrive, when he saw his father drag me into the garage and shove me into a car, he knew something was terribly wrong. He'd used an old family locator app I had installed on his phone years ago, one Roger and Ashley had clearly forgotten existed, to track me here. I told him the truth, in pieces small enough for a 16-year-old to carry, that his father had made terrible decisions with the company, that he needed money, and had used a lie about my health to get it. I didn't tell him about the forged medical document yet. That could wait. I reached into my suitcase and pulled out the leather tool belt, the one my own father had given me. I placed it in Caleb's hands. "This was always yours," I told him. "No matter what happens with your parents, that never changes." He held it against his chest, and something in his young face hardened into a kind of resolve I recognized, because I had seen it in the mirror at his age, the day I decided I would never again let anyone else control what I built with my own hands. "Grandpa," he said, wiping his face, "there's something else, something happening at the house tonight." I sat forward and listened. He told me about the banner in the living room, about the small army of investors his father had flown in from 3 different states, about a much bigger event scheduled 5 days from now, a formal signing gala at the Carolina Grand, where his father planned to finalize a deal selling a 40% stake of Meacham Building Supply to a private investment group, using the medical power of attorney to sign on my behalf. Caleb had seen the paperwork on his father's desk 2 nights earlier. My name printed as the primary party, with an executor authorization line beneath it, exactly where Roger intended to place his own signature. The full shape of the plan clicked into place with a cold, precise click. Roger wasn't just hiding a fraudulent loan. He was about to sell nearly half of a company he did not legally own, using a document built entirely on lies in front of 200 witnesses who would believe every word he said about his dying father. 5 days. I had 5 days to build a case strong enough to bring the entire structure down in one night, in public, in front of the exact audience he was trying to deceive. I looked at Caleb and told him he had done something brave. I told him he needed to go home before anyone noticed he was gone, to act normal, to say nothing, and to call me only from somewhere safe if anything changed. He nodded, hugged me one more time, and slipped back out into the gray morning. I called Frank the moment the door clicked shut. "The timeline just changed," I said. "We have 5 days." Frank flew into Charlotte the next morning with Agent Vance already on a connecting flight behind him. We rented a windowless conference room above a strip mall insurance office, and for the better part of 2 days, we built the case. I had my longtime physician in Dayton fax my full, unedited medical history, 30 pages proving a clean neurological exam 8 weeks prior, and Agent Vance laid it side by side with the forged Charlotte evaluation. The contrast was almost comical. The forged report misspelled my middle name and listed the wrong birth year. Agent Vance told me the neurologist whose signature was on it was already under a state licensing board investigation for unrelated prescription fraud. My case, she said, would likely end his career entirely. We laid out the loan documents beside the shell company payments, beside the payroll fraud. Agent Vance said she had more than enough for an arrest warrant within the hour and offered to send a team to Roger's house that same night. I told her no. "He built this whole scheme on the story that I'm a dying, helpless old man," I said. "If you arrest him quietly, in his kitchen, he'll spend the next 5 years telling everyone he panicked under pressure, that it was all a misunderstanding born of love for his sick father. I want the exact people he lied to standing in the room when the truth comes out. I want it undeniable." Agent Vance studied me for a long moment, then gave a small, respectful nod. "Friday night, then. We'll have a tactical team stationed outside the Carolina Grand." Caleb's texts kept coming in fragments over the next 4 days. His mother growing suspicious after finding a gas station receipt from near my motel in his jacket pocket. His father snapping at everyone in the house, both of them arguing behind closed doors late into the night. On day 3, Roger apparently discovered that his father wasn't safely tucked away 3 states off, and instead of running, he did exactly what a desperate, arrogant man does. He pushed the timeline forward, rushing his lawyers, cutting corners on the very contracts meant to legitimize his theft, personally guaranteeing outstanding company debts in his haste to close the deal before anyone could stop him. By Friday evening, I had everything I needed. The Carolina Grand Ballroom glittered under 2 chandeliers when I slipped through the side entrance in a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since Doris's funeral. I stood in the shadow of a velvet curtain at the back of the room and watched 200 well-dressed strangers eat catered dinner beneath a banner bearing my own company's logo. The logo I had sketched by hand on a piece of scrap plywood back in 1988. At the head table sat Roger, laughing easily with the lead investor, and beside him sat Ashley, her hand resting near her collarbone, where my late wife's sapphire ring caught the chandelier light every time she moved. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed, the room quieted, and Roger walked up to the podium. He gave the performance of his life. He spoke about the company's proud 38-year history, about the calloused hands that built it from a single rented lot. Then his voice dropped, cracked with practiced sorrow, and he told 200 strangers that his father, the man who built all of this, was fading fast, no longer able to recognize his own son some days, resting in a care facility hundreds of miles away. A wave of sympathetic murmurs rolled through the room. Ashley dabbed at a dry eye. Roger said it was time to honor his father's legacy by welcoming new partners into the next chapter of the company, and gestured for the signing portfolio to be brought to the podium. I stepped out from behind the curtain and started walking. I didn't rush. I walked the center aisle at the same steady pace I used to walk the floor of my very first store, past 200 faces that slowly, one by one, turned to follow me with confusion and then dawning shock. A waiter froze mid-step. A board member near the aisle stood halfway out of his chair. By the time I reached the front table, Ashley had turned, met my eyes, and gone the color of chalk. The wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor, the sound cracking through the silent room like a gunshot. Roger looked down from the podium, saw his wife's face, followed her gaze, and found me standing at the base of the stage steps. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a stranger wearing my son's suit. I climbed the 3 steps, walked directly to the podium, and gently took the pen from his shaking hand. "Good evening," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and carrying clean through the speakers. I apologize for interrupting such a moving speech. My name is Walter Meacham. I am the founder and majority owner of this company, and I am here to correct the record. Reports of my decline have been greatly exaggerated. The gasp that moved through that ballroom felt like a change in air pressure. I told them, calmly, precisely, exactly what their money had actually been about to buy a company, drowning not from my absence, but from deliberate fraud, from a forged medical diagnosis, from a $3.2 million loan secured against property that had never carried a debt in its life. I watched the lead investor's face harden from sympathy into fury as understanding set in. I watched Roger sway on his feet, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "Dad," he finally choked out, stumbling forward. "Please, you're confused. You don't understand what you're—" "I understand everything, Roger," I said, and my voice dropped low enough that the room leaned in to hear it. "I understand the shell company. I understand the forged evaluation. I understand exactly where every dollar of that loan went." He staggered back like I had struck him. I turned to the investor, handed him a folded envelope containing copies of everything, and watched him read it in silence before he tore the unsigned contract cleanly in half and dropped it at Roger's feet without another word. His associates rose and walked out behind him. At exactly 8:15, the ballroom doors opened, and Agent Vance walked in with her team. Ashley tried to run and tripped over the hem of her own gown. Roger sank to his knees on the hardwood in front of 200 silent witnesses, sobbing, begging me to stop it, promising to fix everything. I looked down at my son and felt nothing but a quiet, settled certainty. "You stopped being my son the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive," I told him. Then I turned, buttoned my jacket, and walked out into the cold night air, leaving him kneeling in the wreckage of everything he had tried to steal. 6 months later, the house Roger and Ashley lived in was gone, foreclosed on within weeks. Both are serving time in a federal facility, the plea deals negotiated once the evidence became simply too complete to fight. I didn't send money. I didn't hire lawyers to soften the fall. When you build your life on stolen ground, eventually you have to stand in what's left of it. I sit most mornings now in my old office above the Dayton warehouse, the one that still smells like fresh-cut lumber and diesel fuel instead of anything glass and shining. The sapphire ring sits back in my safe deposit box, waiting for Nora's 18th birthday, exactly the way Doris intended. Some mornings the door opens, and it isn't a man in a tailored suit who walks in. It's Caleb, 16 years old, sawdust on his forearms and a battered clipboard in his hand, finishing his shift stocking inventory on the warehouse floor. I didn't give him an office. I gave him the same starting point I once had myself, because a name on a building means nothing if the man carrying it never learns to earn it. I built everything I have with these two hands, and I nearly lost it to a lie born out of greed and desperation. But I got something back that Roger never understood: the value of a grandson who is learning, one honest, tired shift at a time, exactly what it means to build something worth keeping. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and tell me down in the comments, how do you define what a family truly owes each other?